Is the sky falling, or did the cloud just go down? Welcome back to CyberSecureOT. This is Dennis here to share cybersecurity news and what's impacting our critical infrastructure week in and week out. This week includes Amazon Web Services, the Massachusetts healthcare system, what's taking place still in the airline industry, and some bad news from Trend Micro about creative new ways that ransomware attackers are getting into our networks. Additionally, I'm going to share something that's called a threat vector for each of these events so that you can gain a better understanding of exactly how the threat actors were able to pull it off. Now, as I mentioned, I have 4 different events that I'm going to share with you today. And first, we're going to start with the Amazon Web Services event. Amazon Web Services suffered an outage earlier in the week on October 20th that took down their US-East-1 region. And they said this wasn't a cyber attack. This was a system failure. Now, specifically, it took place in the DynamoDB service for their US-East-1 region. And that DynamoDB service is a database type of a service where they store information, either configuration for applications or actual information or data. Now, what's interesting about this type of an outage is that when this takes place, it's still technically a cybersecurity incident. And we'll get to that a little bit more later. What I want to share with you is how we look at the threat vectors and what those are for each of these events. And so even though, like I said, this wasn't a hack, but I'm still going to use it as a threat vector example. The root cause of this was an internal system failure. That was the DynamoDB service that didn't work because the dynamic DNS or the DNS service, which is the domain name service, stopped functioning properly. Now, domain name services, that's used to translate an IP address or a physical address with a software name, like a computer name or an application's name, something like that. So when that doesn't work, things don't communicate. You can't communicate through software to an IP address to a computer, and so you don't know what the destination is, and you don't know how to reach out, basically, essentially, if you're a software application. Now, when that took place, they said, we can look at this like that's the threat vector, but it brought down other things that were running in Amazon Web Services. So in this US-East-1 region, it brought down bank software, so financial software, financial industry, airline software applications, also things like, users' information that are stored in databases for any public services that actually use Amazon Web Services. That information wouldn't have been available. Point of sale systems, that kind of thing. If it was hosted in that region and it used the DynamoDBS, it was down. So this essentially led to a distributed denial of service. So software failure, large global cloud provider like Amazon Web Services, thousands of customers impacted, denial of service. If we're looking at our incident response plan, we say, well, we need to restore things. We also need to make sure that we have other recovery options like fallbacks to other regional services. And you should always consider that when you're using a cloud provider. If it's that critical, you should use multiple regions as long as you don't violate any international trade laws or anything like that. So in this situation, like I said, as a cybersecurity practitioner, you should account for these types of events in your incident response plan. You can call them accidental. Next, switching gears. There's a human toll. This cybersecurity event, an actual cybersecurity event, took place in Massachusetts, impacting North Central Massachusetts hospital network known as Heywood Hospital Systems, and that impacted the Heywood and the Athol hospitals. When this took place, when this happened, the hospitals were no longer able to communicate and their radiology systems went down, so they had to enact what they call a code black. And that code black led to them diverting ambulances and shutting down their emergency rooms. That is the worst type of attack that I can think of in the most important time for people to get care, because they're already suffering at that point. They really need help, and they could be critically injured, and every second counts in those situations. And this was a bad actor that did this. And they're not even 100% sure how this happened, but they think that the threat vector was either through an edge device, meaning malware was installed on a computer that was on the edge of their network, between their network and an external network. That's what we call edge. Or just a phishing campaign. And phishing, we've talked about this before, but phishing is where somebody opens an email, it comes from a threat actor, they click on the link, and then it installs the bad software. Bad software, malicious software, we call it malware. Now, there's not enough information on this one to know if it was malware or if it was ransomware, because ransomware and malware act very similarly if the malware is designed to be destructive. Ransomware encrypts things. It also can destroy the data if you don't pay the ransom. So they're not even 100% sure if it was strictly just a malware attack that was destructive, or if it was ransomware and it just didn't work correctly, but the systems were down. And I'm going to keep an eye on this one because I'm interested to find out what happens later, or what they find out, let's say. Okay, back to our high stakes airline industry debacle that's been going on now for weeks. Envoy Air just announced that they were attacked by a ransomware threat actor group known as CLOP. Now, CLOP got their data, and then they also leaked their data. And so CLOP is a group that's out there to extort people. So they say, hey, if you don't give me money, I'm going to steal your data and you won't be able to get it back. But they also leaked it. So let's say Envoy Air has all this customer information, billing information, and CLOP got a hold of it. It's out there on the web now. Let's talk about the threat vector. This is more of a traditional type of a cyber attack. It is sophisticated, but it's more traditional. CLOP used a zero-day exploit. That's a software exploit that doesn't have a software fix for or a patch for yet. And they were able to get into the network and then act as if they were administrators. Now let's break this down into technical terms. So basically they use CVE 2025-61882, which impacts the Oracle e-business suite, which is a business and logistics system, to access the network without user credentials. That's called unauthenticated access, and then perform what is called a remote code execution. Remote code execution is a system level operation that allows threat actors to do whatever they want on a computer, connect to anything that the computer connect to, and send commands to whatever they want to send commands to. So this essentially is giving them the keys to the kingdom. Well, that's what CLOP did. They took the information and then they leaked it. So threat vector, they get into the network through a 0-day, they run whatever they want to run on the computer, and then they steal the information, install software, and whatever they want to do. That is still going on in the airline industry from all the events that have been taking place over the past month plus. Finally, let's talk about something that is a warning for ransomware. This is a warning about ransomware threat actors and what they do to get into networks. This is just another threat vector warning I'm going to talk about. The theme this week is threat vectors. Trend Micro, experts in cybersecurity and technology, they released an announcement just to give you some better insights on what's taking place in the cyber world about this group called Agenda. That's the name of the group, Agenda Ransomware Group. Trend Micro said on October 24th that they have infuriating tactics to get into networks. Let's talk about what that is. So the threat vector here is they abuse legitimate remote access tools and file sharing tools to steal credentials and then log in either through the tools or however they can using those credentials. So their technique is ingenious because they don't really bother with these complex 0 days or anything like that. And they don't necessarily bother with just trying to mine credentials on the dark web. What they do is they just say, well, let's look to see if we can get access to anything with this software installed on it that's used for remote access or file sharing. So this software that they're specifically looking at is called Splashtop software, or WinSCP. I've never used Splashtop, but I have used WinSCP, and I can tell you, you can store credentials in these things, and they're designed to connect like operating systems, Windows to Windows, or Windows to Linux. And usually when you have software like that, it opens up what we call ports that allows file transfer and commands to be sent between systems. So these are not the types of solutions or software that you want to store credentials in. They essentially give you a backdoor into whatever computer you're connecting to. So Trend Micro says you need to uninstall this stuff, disable this stuff, and don't steal credentials on this stuff, because if those ports are open, if those doors are open, then Agenda is going to come in and install their ransomware. So the message this week, folks, is that the vulnerability isn't just in the dark corners anymore. We've got an exposed cloud service. We've got the airline industry stuff happening. We've got probably relatively flat networks with Massachusetts. If you think about Massachusetts healthcare, if you think about the fact that their email system and their radiology system had the same attack, how did the same software get installed both of those unless they were connected, essentially? And ransomware groups are using legitimate tools to access these networks, meaning you have to protect everything. These groups aren't just looking to encrypt your files. They're meticulously targeting single points of failure, whether it's a doctor's lab or access to the world's most popular database. And they're going to take down the digital backbone if they can. Some of these things look like hiccups, but there's a ripple effect that spreads globally. Remember that. Okay, and this brings us to a close, but I like to summarize everything now. So I'm going to summarize this really quickly if you tuned out some of the noise or you're listening to this in the background while you're doing something else. These are some non-negotiable things that you need to remember. The digital infrastructure blackout at Amazon Web Services, this took place in US-East-1. It was because of an internal DNS issue in the DynamoDB. And this is what could happen if you don't prepare to spread your critical applications out between cloud service providers or cloud service tenants or even cloud service regions. You could lose those services. Ransomware hit the Heywood Hospital and healthcare system, which impacted two hospitals, Heywood Hospital and Athol Hospital in north central Massachusetts. Now, the takeaway here is that software, the malicious software, spread from their email system to their radiology system and to their phone systems. Those systems should not be interconnected. Those should not be what we call a big flat network. Make sure that your critical networks are isolated from one another, and you can do this with security boundary devices or with complete isolation to ensure that your radiology systems and your phone systems and your communication systems that you use to route ambulances and run your emergency rooms don't get taken down. The aviation fallout has continued. We saw where the Oracle e-business suite was used to exploit and then run remote code execution in Envoy Air, impacting Envoy Air. Their data was leaked, meaning their logistics data was leaked, and also this impacts American Airlines. If you are an avid American airline user, then you may suffer some consequences from this. And remember, this was the Clop ransomware gang who's responsible for doing that. The Agenda ransomware group, they are now using normal everyday remote access and file transfer software so that they can get access to networks, typically using stored credentials. So if you're storing your credentials and you're using that software, they're going to find it. They're looking for those ports. If it's connected to the internet, they might find it and they might get access to your environment. The lesson here is grimly clear. From the cloud's foundation to the hospital bedside, cybersecurity threat actors are finding new clever ways to get into these networks, even using old mistakes, and take them down. So if you are an IT or cybersecurity person, go home tonight, hug your loved ones, enjoy a nice dinner, but before you go to bed, plan on going to work tomorrow and identifying if your networks are segmented, if you know your critical systems, if you've diversified your cloud region or installation base, and ensure that you don't have remote access and file transfer programs installed that have credentials stored on your network. Because if those are accessible by the internet, they will get hacked. This is Dennis Hackney in CyberSecureOT. Thank you for joining me. Join me next week for more information on cybersecurity in critical infrastructure.